Hey folks, in today's video we're going over Johan's replies to the previous Tinto Talks on EU5, which was all around the concept of international organizations. This is how the game's going to show you such things as the HRE, the Shogunate, the Catholic Church, and many other things. If you're not sure exactly what this is all talking about, the previous video on the channel covered the actual dev diary itself, but as always, we go over the replies that Johan gave in the post itself, because he always gives us a lot of information related to the actual dev diary, but then also things outside the dev diary as well, and as always, he didn't disappoint this week, and we're just going to get straight into it. And the first question was one by Mindell. He asked, will the various colonies of a colonial nation be grouped together in an organization? And the answer Johan gave is no, that's a colonial nation, so you're not going to get them all kind of bunched together as like, these are all the Spanish holdings, I guess, in the New World or other places on the map. You're going to get still the different, Spanish La Planta, Spanish Florida, and all those kind of things. You're not going to get them all grouped together into one organization, I guess, as like the Spanish colonies. I guess that could be kind of cool if there was a cool system around that, but I can see why they're basically, by the sounds of it, leaving it kind of like how it was in EU4, at least around like how the grouping's going to work. We're not going to get anything too crazy outside of that, which I think makes sense. I don't think that's really what the organization system is about from what Johan did cover in the previous diary. RMS Oceanic then asks, can organizations be centralized like the HRE or native federations in EU4? And organizations can have progress down a path, yes, was kind of a semi-cryptic answer, as Johan is one to do at the best of times. So it does look like you can centralize the HRE into like Germany, basically, or the native federations. I'm not sure how they centralize in EU4. I think that content came out after I stopped playing it, so someone can let me know in the comments down below. But I'm guessing you can kind of centralize them into one kind of Native American federation in that example, and they would then be like the unified First Nations of America and then holding out against the Europeans and things like that. I imagine that's how it works. Like I say, leave a comment down below if it works different to that, but that's what I would guess it would work as. The next question, are there alternatives to enacting the Golden Bull or variations that can be made on it? This was one of the things that was actually covered in the dev diary itself, but a little bit more information. There is none at the moment. I did think in the previous video, maybe you could hold off the Golden Bull, but Johan kind of nipping that in the bud and saying, no, it's kind of inevitable, as Thanos once was. By 1337, the Golden Bull is going to happen, and it looks like it basically always happens. I'm sure there's some mods that will make it so it doesn't happen, but it looks like in general gameplay, you're always going to have it enacted, which kind of makes sense. It'd be kind of weird if it didn't work, but we did think in the previous video, potentially there was a way you could not make it work. In the next question, Alvaro asks, so friggin' cool. Is this how trade leagues like the Hansa or the banking countries will work through this international organization mechanic? And the answer is actually no. This isn't how these are going to work. This was, again, some of the things that we thought, oh, this international organization system is how they're going to kind of group some of these things together. But Johan actually pointing out that no, they have their own special mechanics around trade leagues and how they're going to work in game, which we haven't really seen covered. We've seen it mentioned here or there, but no actual firm information on how they're going to be playable and how their mechanics work, but we'll get more information, obviously, in the future around those, for sure. In the next question, can IOs have civil wars, for example, anti-popes, anti-emperors, or the religious wars? And they're going to talk about anti-popes soon, and it is the religion dev diary tomorrow, in fact. As I said, these videos are a little bit later than usual, but tomorrow is the religious dev diary. So I would imagine from this, it sounds like he's going to talk about anti-popes at least a little bit tomorrow and give us some information on that, as it's, capitalized soon. Makes me think it is going to be in the dev diary tomorrow. Will there be some organizations that can somehow unify into a single state, the HRE being an obvious example? The answer being could be yes, but it's unique per IO if the content designer has designed it that way. So to spin off this, I didn't copy down the other question that was kind of related to this, but Johan basically went into a lot of detail about how the team that he has pretty much have free reign to design the IOs in certain areas of the game, however they really want it to work. So the HRE, the Catholic Church, the Shogunate, all these different systems, they can actually work very differently from each other using the same system. As he said in the dev diary, it's a very flexible system, and he's pretty much let the team who's designing that specific version of it do whatever they really want to do it. That's pretty cool to see that he's letting people just have free reign, make us some really cool content, and it's not so like unified into similar ways of working. I'm pretty much just saying here that like it really just depends who designed that IO as to exactly how it's going to work, but as he did say in one of the previous questions, you can unify them in some ways, depending if the mechanic was made for that, such as the HRE. there'll definitely be a way to kind of unify the HRE into one nation, really, as there is in EU4. The next question, no caliphate in the international organizations. And as always, that people ask these kind of questions in the dev diaries, and I can kind of see why they do. But Johan's saying, like, we didn't list everyone. We didn't list all the IOs we've made, which are the international organizations. I will, as many people do, kind of cut this down to IOs. It's a bit easier for me to say a lot of times during these videos. But, you know, Johan's saying, like, look, we only listed some of them. And the next question, regarding the Tatar yoke, why is the Golden Horde not part of it? Does it have its own special interactions? The whole point of the Tatar yoke is that the Russians are the hordes to smack around, so they should have some say in how the tax collection is handled. And Johan's saying the Golden Horde owns it, they are not part of it. So it looks like you can own these IOs as well in some respects, as he kind of did say actually in the dev diary that countries can be the rulers of IOs. So again, this is a good example of this. The Tatar yoke is an IO of its own, and it kind of has some kind of freedom to kind of work different ways. Different nations can kind of rule the Tatar yoke, but at the end of the day, the Golden Horde is in charge of it, or has like ultimate control over it. Is like a like autonomous kind of grouping that is controlled in theory by another group, or at least has to give some deference to another group. That's how some of them are going to work. And the next question, are IOs hard-coded or customizable? Could I, example, found a new Catholic church for Protestants with its own cardinals and laws? And what I will say is this actually clears up some things that were kind of, I think, not really confusing in the dev diary, but I did see a lot of people asking questions about it, and Johan had to clarify it a few times, that modders can make this system however they want. They can change it. It's a dynamic, scriptable, extendable system, but the actual IOs that are in the game are the only ones that are in the game unless you mod in new ones. You can't make separate IOs in the game. He actually clarified this in a different question where he said you can only have, as he says here as well, a player can only play with the ones that are in the game. So you can't, by the sounds of it, actually make these kind of fresh out of nowhere by the sounds of it. I think they have to be the ones that are in the game themselves. And as I was saying, again, kind of clarifying that further here, just to clarify, can we actually create organizations when playing the game aside from coalitions and defensive unions? So yes, I should have said that in the last one. Those ones, obviously, you can create. It's more the kind of special standalone ones that are the ones that you can't create. Or is it only a neat design tool for the dev team and modders to keep adding new organizations into the game later on? And Johan again saying, it is a neat design tool for the dev team and modders to provide flavorful content. So yes, you can obviously make the coalitions, the crusades, all those kind of like generic ones that he was talking about, because obviously you've got to be able to make personal unions, coalitions, alliances, all that kind of thing in the game. But it's actually the standalone ones like the Shogunate that are going to be kind of hard-coded into the game, I guess you could say. You can't make a new version of the Shogunate unless you use a mod that kind of creates that for you. So it does kind of clarify this between this and the previous answer, because as I said, a lot of people were asking about this because it was kind of confusing in the dev diary. When I read it myself, and when I did the video, I believed it meant that you could make your own. Well, you can make your own through mods, but you can't make your own in the game during a campaign. The next question was all about unions. Are subject unions more free to do their own thing in this game? Can Bohemia under Luxembourg declare its own wars? And will it not automatically be called into an offensive war with its overlord? Also, will it be possible to move my court to my personal union subject, sort of like Charles IV making Bohemia's primary title and not Luxembourg? And then this was actually a really interesting answer. There is no subjects in a personal union in Project Caesar, and all countries are equal in a union. So it does sound like there is going to be some more autonomy than you get currently in EU4. So it's not going to be quite as restrictive. If you do find yourself in a personal union, you are going to be able to do a little bit more stuff and not just be kind of locked down, really, kind of waiting for the end of your campaign in some respects. But it does look like it is going to be a little bit more kind of loosened out, let you do some things, but ultimately you are kind of like under this personal union with another nation, which is going to restrict some things for sure. In the next question, are the Knights, Teutonic Order, Livonian Order, and whatever else they may be, countries, international organizations, or something else? These are all countries, so the Knights, Teutonic Order, and Livonian Order are countries. They're not falling under this new IO system. They are actually just countries, the same as they are in EU4, so nothing too crazy going about with those. Next question, so will the EU4 colonial trade companies be IOs or something else different as a whole? No, they will be countries. So again, similar to the last one and one of the earlier questions, colonial/trade companies are going to be actual countries on the map. They're not going to fall under this IO system. The Red Death then asked, you did not mention leagues like the Hansa. Are these also IOs? Additionally, are there some other organizations that are directly playable? And no, the answer is only countries are playable entities. You can't play as one of these IOs. So you can't play as the Catholic Church. You can play as the Papal States, I would imagine, but you can't play as, the Catholic Church. You can't play, I guess, as the shogunate, I guess. Like, you kind of are, because you'll become shogun, and then you will be in charge of the shogunate, but you can't play kind of like as the shogunate, if you want to think of it that way. Like, you play as a nation that is leading it, or something like that, but you don't actually play the organization itself, which I think makes sense. It would be kind of interesting to do it, but I'm not sure how the gameplay would work if you were kind of like one step removed from playing as a nation in EU5. But it was an interesting question and a good answer, I guess, kind of clarifying that is not the case. And the next question, all for you Swiss players, does that mean that EU5 will be the first game in Paradox history to accurately represent Switzerland as a permanent military alliance of independent cities and cantons? They didn't think such a thing was possible in their lifetime. And Johan's saying they've not done the Swiss flavor yet, but the Swiss Confederation is one of the reasons why they actually made the IO system, because it allows them to do these kind of confederated systems that wouldn't really work under the old, EU4 systems. They just never work this way, and it would be kind of impossible for them to implement it into that game, just by the way it's coded and things. But in EU5, they're building these systems up from the ground to allow them to do these systems. So although they haven't actually done the Swiss flavor yet, they built this system with it in mind, as like, we definitely want the system to be flexible enough that we can do such things as a Swiss Confederation and do it justice and make it enjoyable for the players as well. Well, hopefully enjoyable for us. We'll obviously see in the future. In the next question, aggressive expansion and coalitions, will they work the same as EU4? Johan, short as ever, no. They will not work the same way, because he did mention that aggressive expansion is coming back, but we've got no clarification about exactly how it's going to work. I think it will work vastly different. It was, as I said in the last video, just kind of annoying in EU4. For all of you that have played it, I'm sure many of you who are watching this video have played EU4. Aggressive expansion is just annoying. At the end of the day, it is just the numbers, the memes say. But, it is coming back, but we will see exactly how it's going to work in a future dev diary. In the next question, does that mean that we'll have characters in the game like Imperator Rome? Or will they just be names with traits and skills like in EU4? I kind of covered this a little bit in the last video, but Johan did clarify it a little bit further. So EU4 had characters, which is true. You did have like your king, who they were married to, your heir. They were characters, but at the end of the day, they were just names with, what is it, like 3 skills in the end, and just a stat stick outside of that. Like, they weren't really characters in the way kind of like a Crusader Kings 3 player would think of a character. As I said, there have been a lot of people asking about this, and he did continue to say the leader of the HRE was the character that was the ruler of the country. So again, I'm not going to say like a wishy-washy answer by Johan, but kind of saying like yes, but I'm not going to give you any more information. We're not going to get characters, I think, like Imperator or CK3. I don't think that's going to happen. I think it is just going to be the system like in EU4, where you have your king, your heir, who you're married to, maybe who they're married to. Perhaps you'll get more of like a family tree system or something like that, and maybe there'll be like a 3D model. To be honest, I quite like the fact that EU4 doesn't have like 3D models. Like, I like them in Crusader Kings. I think it makes more sense because that game is really focused on the characters. And in Victoria, they also use the same system to have characters in 3D and real nice art direction and things like that. But I don't know. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. I kind of feel like EU4, I think it's kind of nice that it doesn't have that. I think it would just kind of clutter up the UI and things for no real benefit. But maybe in EU5 we could do that. Funnily enough, I almost would like a kind of like halfway house where it's kind of like the old CK2 kind of portrait system, but really, brought up to the modern day age, really looking really good, a lot of variation in it, but not have it as like a full 3D system, because I don't know, EU4 and EU5 is all about nations. You're playing the nation, you're not playing the king or the queen like you are in Crusader Kings. So I don't know. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. I'm fine with it not going down the road of having like proper characters in it. Obviously your king and things like that are characters, because you have to have them named and things like that, obviously. But they're not like characters in the way a lot of, I think, Paradox players think of characters, like they're from Crusader Kings and things like that. But anyway, we'll get more information as always in the future. In the next question, if personal unions are a type of international organization, is it possible to unite 2 countries that are part of a personal union? And Johan's saying there are ways to make a personal union become integrated, the same as there is in EU4. I'm sure it's going to work a little bit different, as all these systems have, and I say that pretty much every week on these videos. I'm sure it will work differently, but you can obviously integrate them into the same title. The next question, also around personal unions, will this be abandoning the percentage chance system that was in previous Europa Universalis games? And Johan is pretty much saying the abomination from EU3, EU4 will not be in Project Caesar. We are going to get a new system on how personal unions are going to work exactly, what triggers them to, fully activate with which nation, etc. It's going to be a lot more in depth, I think. I think that system didn't really make a whole lot of sense. Was kind of random in many respects. So it's good to hear that system is going away. In the next question, I like the idea of these IOs a lot, but please tell me that whatever interface we will have, it will not just be some generic interface. I don't know if the UI for the HRE in EU4 is necessarily the best UI, but it is thematic, and the loss of thematic UI from CK2 to CK3, for instance, was very disappointing to him, and I think a lot of players. Now, CK3 does have some kind of thematic UIs, but not really. There's only, like 2 or 3 different kind of thematic UIs in there. I will agree the HRE UI in EU4 is very thematic. It is pretty cool. Even for such an old game with kind of like old graphics, as it were, it is kind of a cool UI. And Johan with a fantastic answer, all are unique, and they also have their own flavorful building blocks as well. So it looks like the UI is kind of customizable for any version of these IOs that are made. And as I said earlier in the video, it looks like the production team for the game kind of make their own versions of it for each different one that's kind of under their control. The ones they're designing, they have free reign to do what they want. And it looks like they basically go to the art department and say, I want a cool HRE looking UI for this IO. The Catholic Church will have one that looks very religious and things like that. I'm sure one of the other ones, again, I always bring up the Shogunate. That's going to look very, ancient Japanese and things like that. So fantastic again to hear, because that was one of the complaints around Victoria about Crusader Kings for the most part, is that no matter where you play, the UI is kind of the same and it gets very samey, playing around in different areas of the map, but the UI never really kind of matches those areas. It does look like, at least for these IOs, we are going to get custom kind of UIs for each one, which again is awesome if you're playing in these different areas. In the next question, Daniel the Finlander asked both of them. So playable trade companies confirmed. This was in relation to one of the earlier questions we covered, and the answer from Johan, yes, confirming that playable trade companies are coming to the game. I do believe this was mentioned previously. Again, I could be incorrect. We've had a few of these already, especially with Johan's answers and how scattergun he is sometimes. It's kind of hard to track down old answers and things, but again, Johan confirming playable trade companies are coming to the game at launch, which is awesome to hear. I know many of you have been looking forward to that in Crusader Kings. It looks like you could potentially be playing them in EU5 first, which will be a scary thing for some of you, but it looks like that could actually be the case. In the next question, Metz then asked, out of curiosity, will you need to wait a month in the game before declaring war, or will the game allow instant day one actions to take place? If you don't play EU4, if you've never played it, I'm not sure about EU3, but anyway, in EU4, you can't do anything in the first month. You kind of have this build-up period where nothing can really happen that can change the map. You can't declare wars and things like that. You can make alliances, you can do all the other kind of stuff. You can start influencing people, I believe, but you can't declare war in the first month. I think this is to give the AI a bit of time to kind of get its kind of country in order, as it were, and kind of get ready for the game itself, using that first month to set everything up in their nations and get ready for what's to come. And Johan confirming this will still be in place for EU5, again, for the same reason, I think, preventing the player mainly from just declaring day one wars and taking advantage of that, which we would do. We would be able to have these kind of like weird, like instant wars, and the AI wouldn't be able to react quick enough. Can some nations be in 1 or 2 different IOs at once? And the answer being yes. Again, this one kind of obvious, but I guess, not that obvious because somebody asked the question. Not saying it was a bad question, but obviously you could be in the Catholic Church IO and you could also be in the HRE. That's a prime example covered by the 2 examples that Johan gave in the dev diary itself. So you can be more of one of these. I don't know if there's going to be like an upper limit. I guess not. But that is a prime example. Obviously, one of the nations like Bohemia could be in the HRE, obviously, and it would also be part of the Catholic Church as well, unless it switched to Protestantism or something like that. It's a good question, but for me, it was pretty obvious. But might be the first time you've played a Paradox game, and some of these questions, not so obvious. That's why I go through some of these questions that, if you are a veteran of these games, you're probably thinking like, Malf, that's an obvious answer, and I might even say that myself. But there's going to be a lot of people coming to this that maybe skipped EU4, didn't want to get into it so late on due to the cost and basically learning the game from the ground up. And, they won't know how some of these systems work. So I do like to cover these questions that might be obvious to me and you, but, the other you that's watching this video, you might pick something up that you didn't know, such as this. In the next question, will personal union dissolve because of different succession laws or just from opinion like in EU4? and they're going to talk about that in a few weeks' time. So it looks like, I guess in a couple of weeks, we're going to get maybe a personal union specific dev diary, or maybe a succession law dev diary, and it will kind of be covered in that as well. I guess maybe the succession laws, maybe we'll just get like a royal family kind of, if you want to think of it that way, kind of dev diary, and how those kind of characters will work, which would need to cover these kind of things as well. But we will get more information about that in the future. And with that, that's the end of the answers I picked out that Johan gave in the previous dev diary, which covered, as I said, the international organizations. If you didn't pick that up during the whole video, which would be very surprising if that was the case. And as we've mentioned a few times, religion is the next dev diary, and that is out tomorrow, in fact. I will be covering that on the day it's released this time, as usual. Like I say, these ones were just a little bit delayed due to a vacation I had, so I will be back with a video again tomorrow covering everything about religion that he talks about. Should be a really interesting one. Maybe we'll get some information about how crusades and things like that are going to work in the game. Obviously very different from EU4 with the different start date and things like that, so it looks like we are going to get some information about that. But as always, if you've enjoyed today's video, hit that like button, subscribe if you're new here. I'm covering EU5 up to official announcement, launch, and beyond. Now, when that's going to be, we actually got a response from a dev saying that we aren't going to get an announcement of EU5 this year, which is a bit surprising. I kind of thought we would. Maybe later in the year, you know, towards August, September, October-ish, something like that. I kind of thought we'd get an official announcement and then we get proper EU5 dev diaries. Like these Tinto Talks, they're not really like full dev diaries, just giving us a rough idea. And then Johan's getting feedback and making some changes, which again, in this dev diary, he actually goes through and says they've changed the name of some things and things like that due to feedback that players have given already, even on this dev diary. And he does that every time. But yeah, as I said, this dev did say we're not going to get an announcement this year. I did see that kind of surprise some people. I think some people almost thought the game was coming out this year, which is kind of crazy to me. I do think the game is probably going to come out at the end of next year. I think we will get an announcement pretty early next year. I would say like February, March, maybe. Maybe the next PDXCon. I can't for the life of me at the moment think of when PDXCon usually is. I probably should know, but I've never been and I've never been invited. So, you know, I don't remember off the top of my head when it usually is. But I would imagine in the next PDXCon, I guess next year, we'll get an announcement. And then I think, to be honest, we'll get released pretty quickly after that. I'd be very surprised if the game is announced next year and then it's like another full year before it comes out. I can't think that there's going to be 2 years of dev diaries for a game that looks like, not like it's finished at all. Even Johan says in his answers, there's things they haven't done yet. But I'd be very surprised if it gets, you know, 2 years away before we get game release. I'd be shocked if that's the case, but we will find out in the future. Let me know in the comments down below, I guess. If you're watching this in 2 years' time, in 2026, and the game's not out, at me in the replies, and we can have a little chat about it in the comments down below. But anyway, we'll leave it there for today. As always, I'll see you in the next one.